Welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be painting seashells on the beach. I'm alone in studio today. Dennis is away on holiday, so bear with me with the camera changes and stuff like that, but we should be fine. Alright, today I've got a ton of stuff that I want to teach you. We're going to learn how to create the impression of sea sand, and then I want to show you how to do wet sand and dry sand. I want to show you how to show that close-up of the wave rushing up over the beach, and of course we're going to learn to paint seashells as well, so lots of work to do. So I'm going to show you the picture we've done today. Now, just for the guys that like to paint along, I've painted in advance, so it's about a 5-hour painting that I've had to bring down, so it may be a little bit difficult painting with, because I'm going to be speeding things up a little bit today, so a little bit different than normal. Alright, so let's go here. Let me zoom out on this. This is basically the scene that we're going to be doing today. Now, this is not a photograph that I took or found or anything like that. What I've actually done is I've gone and taken a whole bunch of different photos and I've turned them into one single picture. So for a start, there's the shell. So all these photographs I did get off Morgfile, my usual place to grab photographs from. So there's the shell, the one shell, and then I used that there for the foam and stuff. And let's see, where's the rest? And then I used this guy over here to get this. I quite like this little outline over here, so I used that guy over there as inspiration as well. I'm just trying to find me other seashells. I can't find them. Oh well, never mind. So what I did was I just took all these guys and then I combined them into one. Now, I've obviously done this on the computer, but I mean it's easy for you to do this just with a little thumbnail sketch or a little thumbnail painting, or even just a quick little pencil sketch. And when you get really fancy, you just do it in your head. But I like to. Am I having a senior moment, Nina? Okay. That's bad. That's bad when you start having senior moments already. Okay. So what I did was I did combine it like this on the computer because I wanted you guys to have something to look at and have a visual of it beforehand. So that's the only reason why I did it. If I'm painting, I wouldn't normally go to all this trouble to do it on the computer. I would just go straight out and start painting and use the different photographs for reference. So we've got a little bit of dry sand over here, and then we've got some wet sand. This one's nice because we've got a little bit of sand inside that shell. I like that. And here's a little wet stone, so we can get that effect. And then this guy over here, he was actually a full shell, but then I turned him into a one that's sort of buried, just for a bit of variety. Okay, I found my last photograph. He was hiding in another spot. So I've got that one there. Actually, it was this guy over here minus that one over there. Somehow I seem to have, there was actually another shell over there. I think I've overwritten that file. Never mind. So I decided to bury him. You see, he was full out. So I decided to bury him in the sand, just again to add a little bit of interest. And that was it. So what we're going to do now is just go over to the video, and I'll show you how I painted this guy. Let me get him open. Okay, because we're doing the video thing, don't be shy to ask me questions as we go along. Alright, so what I've done is I've printed out the picture onto tiled pages. So I've just basically tiled those pages together to get it exactly the same size as my canvas. Then I've used regular carbon paper, and what I'm doing is I'm tracing the shells, but if you look carefully you'll see I'm not doing a solid line. I'm using dotted lines because I don't want, especially with these lighter shells, I don't want the lines to shine through in the end of when the painting's done. Tony's asking how my wife is doing nowadays. Her eye is actually doing really good. So she ended up having a second operation on her eye because they mucked up the first one, but the second one seems to have been a big success. So thanks for asking. She's doing very well. So when I'm tracing this, I'm looking for the major lines. So you see there with that one, I did do a little bit of on the inside as well, just to get those curves right. Alright, so now I'm going to use my watercolor pencil. So I'd use the correct color, correct place. So like here I'm using a brown watercolor pencil. And now I'm using my watercolor pencil to make complete lines, because I know the watercolor pencil will blend in once I'm done. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my clear cover, that book cover, and I'm going to create a mask, and I'm just going to go and cut out the outlines, or create a mask for each shell. That'll allow me to do the whole background, because we're going to be putting splatter on the background. So what I want to do there is just make sure I don't get splatter all over my pretty shells. So I'm going to mask them off. Yeah, carbon paper is that regular stuff that you'd use if you want to make a copy of like a carbon copy. So carbon paper is another way to say it. Now you see, when I'm pulling off this mask, because it's one solid sheet, I'm being very careful to make sure that I've cut all the way through and I don't rip off the areas that shouldn't. So where I've missed a little piece, because sometimes it's difficult because it's transparent, then I'll just trim it as I go along. And then I'll give it a good little rub just to make sure they're all stuck. Alright, so the color mixing, we're going to start with the dry sand and then we'll wet it after that. So I've used some titanium white and some yellow ochre. And those two colors on their own actually gave me a nice little version of the sand color. So I was happy with that. So what I have done is, because I've got to cover such a large area, I have thinned it down a little bit just to get it nice and creamy, but not sloppy. And I'm just using my 1/2 inch hardware brush, and I'm just going to cover the entire canvas. So you'll see what I'm doing is I'm going straight over those masks. I'm not trying to paint around them or anything like that. You can go straight over those masks. That's what they're for. Let them do their job. Gail says when she used the clear cover, she gets a ridge at the edge. Yeah, you'll see what I do is I after I've peeled the the mask off, then I'll rub over it. I even use the back of my thumb. Alright, so now that we've covered it, you see I'm just tapping the brush like that to spread the hairs, because to get the sand effect, we don't want to be able to see brush strokes, so now I'm tapping it over the entire canvas. And you see what I'm doing? As I'm tapping it, I'm rotating the brush as well. I don't want any patterns in that background. So it does take a while, and your arm does get pretty tired doing that. And you also see I sort of work a little here, then I work a little there, again, just to make sure I don't get any patterns. So I work as random as I possibly can. Alright, so now what I'm doing is I'm adding some more yellow ochre to it. So what we want to do now is start to get a sea sand effect with all those little tiny pebbles. So there I'm adding, I'm painting in acrylics, by the way. If you're using oils, you just add lots of medium. Because I'm in acrylics, I've added lots and lots of water. I want to get this paint super sloppy. You see how sloshy it is? If it's not all runny like this, you're not going to get nice drops. So your rule of thumb with those splatter is the thinner it is, the bigger the dots. The thicker your paint is, the smaller the dots are. So I'll just use my regular old bristle brush, tap it in the paint. You can load it up quite a bit, and I'll use my finger and just splatter over the entire area. Now, what's nice about this is that you're going to get all sorts of different sizes. Smaller dots, bigger dots. And that's wonderful, because that gives you those fine little pebbles, but it also gives you little pieces of shell and stuff with the bigger dots. So if you splattering like this, sometimes your brush gets a bit loaded and it gives you a big blob. That's fine, it's a bigger shell. Give him a shadow at the end of the day. Batman is asking how runny. Batman, you know, you can make it as runny as water. It can be really thick. Like I say, the thinner it is, the bigger the dots. So that's how you sort of control the amount of dots or the size of the dots. Nina's asking if you could use a toothbrush. Yes, you can, but I find that the toothbrush tends to give you really fine dots. So with a brush, you tend to get sort of irregular sized dots. Alright, so what I did there was I showed you how to splatter the one. Now obviously sea sand has got all sorts of colors in it, so now I'm just using mixing up a few different varieties, lighter ones, darker ones. So the color I've added there is some Payne's Grey. So I've used that into some of that initial base color, and then I added some more. Here I'm adding a bit more yellow ochre to this batch. So I think I mixed up about a good 5 colors. I usually find when I'm doing the sea sand that 5 colors is good. That there's a bit of burnt umber that I'm adding. And again, watering them way down. They must be really runny. And there's a lighter one. So how many colors have we got there? 6 colors. So that there's just white and a little bit of one of those greyish colors and a bit of your base color. Just so that I added the greys just so that it's not too bright. I don't want it to compete with little sun specks and stuff that we add later. So that's what it looks like when it's all splattered. You see, I haven't tried to cover everything. You've got your base color, which is most of it, and then, but there's still quite a bit of splatter. And then I've dried it. I've dried it very well, because after this I need to go and paint over that, and you don't want those little dots to smear. It did take quite a while, because you've now obviously got lots and lots of water in there. So if you've got oils, you're lucky because your medium actually speeds up the drying process. So if you've added a bit of medium into that base layer that you gave, then it should be dry the next day or so. Alright, now we're going to start painting our the little bits of sand that are inside the seashells. So I suppose you could have done it beforehand as well. To be perfectly honest, I forgot when I painted it. It's only afterwards I realized, oh, silly Billy, you forgot to peel out those little sandy pieces. So I'm doing it now, but it doesn't matter. It just shows you that it's quite possible to do it afterwards. So I just used the sand color again. There I just blended it in to make sure that little line disappeared on me. And I added a bit of splat into that as well. By this time it was quite late at night, so you can see the color on the palette is not quite as what it should be. Alright, so I've taken my sand color and I've added a bit of that, the grey mix into it. What that's going to do is it's going to give me my wet sand look. So all I've done is I've taken the initial sand color and I've used Payne's grey to grey it down. So what I'm going to create now is that initial line there where the previous wave has just sort of washed up and it's wet the sand. Now I've created a solid, that initial silhouette line. The rest though, I'm going to paint it sort of in a bit of a, again in a bit of a random fashion, so that I'm not totally covering up the first sand color. Now what that's doing is it's creating a bit of a mottled effect. And that gives you those little undulations, that it shows you that the sand is not perfectly smooth. Here you'll be able to see me doing it. So I am going to paint this piece here in real time so you can see exactly how I do it. When you do this, it's important to turn your hand and turn the brush and stuff, and brush in different directions. You see that? So that you're not getting patterns. Really important to not get patterns. There you can see nicely how you got those little variations in color. So I'm going to do that with the whole background. Batman says he's when he's doing splatter, it always ends up too runny. I suppose it sort of just comes with experience. What I often do is, if you're in doubt, rather make it a little too thick and then splatter, and if you see nothing's happening, then splatter again, and then thin it down a little bit more, and then splatter again until you're happy. And obviously, don't be shy to practice just on a piece of paper first. Gee, wish we could paint like this every day so quickly, eh? Make a fortune selling our paintings then. Okie dokie, so now we've got our wet sand look. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? Okay, so now I'm adding more of the grey. So I'm mixing a darker version now. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the shadows of my shells. While I've got them masked off, it's nice. I like doing my shadows first. For a start, it gives me a nice 3D effect, and then I immediately feel that I've got depth in the painting. But it also allows me to then go over the mask, so I don't have to go and try and squeeze in a shadow afterwards. and carefully work up to the shell. Now often you'll find that these shadows that you put in initially aren't dark enough, but that's fine. At least you've got that base to work from. To sort of darken it up from there is easy. You still don't have to aim as much as if you had to just put in the shadow afterwards. Because if you don't work right up against the, say, the shell, you don't notice it. Alrighty, so now we're going to start painting our shells themselves next. So let's just get that shadow there finished. And now we can actually go and remove those masks. We're done with them for now. Okay, what I did here was I just I dried everything off again. Oh yes, no sorry, there I'm just busy splattering that sandy piece inside the shells. Okay, so let's take those masks off. Now see what I'm doing is I'm not throwing them away. I'm actually sticking them up on one of my pillars here that I've got for the camera. Stick it onto the table or something like that. I always like to keep a mask until the painting's finished because you never know when you need it again. Tony's asking what I think of 3D impasto paintings. Just clarify, what is a 3D impasto painting? It's like normal impasto painting with a knife and stuff? If you're asking me about that, nice just thick paint and stuff, I love them. That's why I enjoy painting with a knife. Alright, so what I'm doing there is I'm just softening those edges because I don't want hard edges. Remember, it's little grains of sand. So they won't stop in a perfect line, they sort of taper off as they go up the shell, as they piled up on top of each other. So I'm just softening that line there. Okay, Tony says deep impasto. Okay, now take a look over here. You see how I've offset that little shadow over there? That's really important because that lifts that tip, that right hand tip, off the seabed. So already at this point I could see that shadow wasn't deep enough. It wasn't giving me enough lift, so I just went back and I darkened that. Tony, yeah, I like any impasto painting. I don't know. I feel that just it's great. I obviously like the detailed paintings like this as well, but it's nice. It keeps you nice and loose to do impasto paintings as well. And of course, the customers like them, so they sell well. Alright, so what I did was I was just looking at the colors over there of that top shell. So I saw a bit of burnt sienna and possibly a bit of burnt umber into the mix as well. So burnt sienna and white. So you can see I had that lighter color there, so I thought, oh, what the heck, let's just use that, save some paint. And I added a touch of burnt sienna in it, burnt umber into it, just to kill that brightness of the burnt sienna. Now you'll also see what I'm doing is I'm comparing that color to the actual seashell on the screen. So I added just a touch of orange just to correct the color over there. Now I'm using my fine liner, and I'm going to just pretty much block it in And that inside edge there, I'm going to try and just leave a little bit of white left there, because that does get a highlight. Okay, so there I've just added a little bit more burnt umber to the mix. I'm darkening it up, and that's going to give me that rounding. See, take burnt umber into that base mix, and that's giving me that dark color. Now to lighten it, I've added a bit more white and some cadmium orange to it. And that's given me a nice little highlight color there. And now you'll see that the highlight sort of just completes that rounding. Now you've got a full sort of, you can already get a nice little looking in effect. Now I'm darkening up that. In this painting, the light is coming from the right to the left. So I've darkened up that left hand side there just to show that it's rounded. Alright, and then in this corner over here, there's that little piece of shell more that you can see. So all I've done is I've added in the white, and now to show that there's a ridge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow in there. So in other words, the side is casting a shadow onto the inside of the shell. Now you see, the minute I put that in and fade it away, I immediately get extra height there. I always look out for those little places where I can get that extra height. And then you see it's also got that little center piece. Not quite sure what it is, but I saw it, so I put it in, and I thought it looked cool. So it's a nice little sharp line there as well, and then that just sort of disappears into the sand. So I put that in. So for this shell, there was really nothing to it. Some basic shadings, a little bit of observation, and that was it. So just by softening those edges of the sand, you can already see that sand just lying inside that shell. Alright, the next one is a little bit more to it, because it's got sort of that mottled color on the inside. You see there? So again, I'm using the same colors, and I'm just putting down a little bit of color, and then I'll soften it with my finger or with a brush. Put down a little color, soften it again, and that gives me those lighter and darker patches to get that mottled effect. Now what I'm trying to concentrate on as well is getting that edge of the shell, because I want to get that looking in effect, especially here on the bottom right hand side. So I'm going to work on that edge to get that little highlight in there, so where it suddenly goes darker, and that gives me that nice looking in effect. So between that and its little shadow that it casts on the ground, and that makes him sort of stand up. Okay, so there I'm using some neat white. I've actually got a little bit of pencil mark of my watercolor pencil mark that's still shining through there. So I was trying to get rid of that. Plus, you'll see on the photo it's got a really sharp white line, that edge over there. So that's what I was working on at this point. There you can see me just darkening that up again, just to get that looking in effect. And then over here I'm busy working in that shadow that the shell next to it is casting on this one. So now that'll again give me extra depth in 3D. Yeah, Tony, it sounds interesting what you're quite inquisitive now to know what you got in mind, what you're working on. All right, so now again, I'm just using a bit of the light, like you could even use a neat white there, just to get a little bit of a speckled effect on the edge where the sand meets the shell. Okay, now you'll see I was still not happy with the actual how much the shell stood out. It still tended to blend in a little bit too much for my liking. So I decided eventually to use my artist license and give it that little darker edge instead of a white edge. And that just created a nice separation for me between the sand and the shell, because now you've suddenly got that contrast there. So that just lifted it right up. You also see later on I actually made that shadow of it a little bit longer as well. Again, just to lift it up even more. Just working there on getting that little mottled effect. I think with that I was reasonably happy. You see now how that little dark edge makes him just stand out? The shadow was still a bit short though, but I did eventually get to that. Alright, next one. So now we're on our third shell. So all three of these shells so far have been the same. They're not too intricate because it's just a little bit of shading. And obviously I could use all the same colors. So with this one here, I basically first blocked in most of that shell because it's reasonably monotone. And by blocking him in like that, that gave me some wet paint that could flow around when I brought in the other colors. Because all the rest are all just blendings. Alright, so there I'm just using a little bit of that ready color. Over here I'm using a bit more of I've added some grey to it, and that's to give me that shadow over there on the sea sand. So in other words, I'm using the sea sand's color, shadow color. Exactly the same as what we used for the shadows of the shells on the sand. Mary's asking about a template for this. Yes, I will definitely give you guys a template for this. Alright, so to get that looking in effect over there, what we got to do is just I've used a little bit of Payne's grey and some white. It's got a bluish tinge to it, that little shadow over there. So what I did was my Payne's grey has got a bit of a bluish tinge to it. If you haven't got Payne's grey, you can use your three primaries. So use French ultramarine, cadmium red, cadmium yellow, and then in a 4:1 ratio. 4 ultramarine, 2 cadmium red, and then 1 cadmium yellow. And then adjust it from there to make sure it's just on the blue side. Now what's nice about it is that little shading over there just gives you that indentation and makes it look deep. So you couldn't do without that little shading there. In hindsight, I could probably have darkened it up even more. But you can see as I darken it up, you can see deeper and deeper and deeper into that shell. So The more contrast you give there, the more depth you're going to get. Alright, to get that little edge over there, if you, when you look on the photograph, you'll see it's actually got a little bit of a mottled effect to it, so it's not a smooth shading. It's almost made up of little lines. So what I did was I picked up the paint on the brush, on my full bit brush, but then I lightly tapped the full bit to spread the hairs again, and then I gently dragged those colors in there, and that gave me a bit of a mottled effect. Then I did come back, you'll see now I've got the fine liner there, just to really bring out those little lines with a little bit of a darker version. So again, I'm just using a bit of a choppy motion there. There again was a little indentation, so I put in the dark line and then I just faded him out, and that gave me the depth that I needed there. That is pure white that I'm adding. I'm just trying to create a little bit of a shine to it, because remember over here that a previous wave has just come in, so the shell and the stone are wet. So when things are wet, they got little reflections on them. So I'm just dabbing in that pure white, and that's going to start giving me that nice reflective look. Here again, I want to just get that mottled effect. There's individual grains of sand, so I'm not going to try and show individual grains of sand. So I just added just roughened up the edge, and there's just one or two little sparkly bits. And now I'm going to add in just a few little those little bubbles. Quite like them. So what you do to create that bubble, it's very much the same as a water drop. You've got that little highlight to it, and then it's got a shading on the inside from light to dark. So what you got to do is look out for where's the highlight on the edge, and in which direction does the shading go on the inside, and then obviously what colors are reflecting inside that little water drop, or the bubble rather. And then right at the end, you see there I've got a little bit of the shell color actually reflecting in there. Right at the end, you come back in and you add that little sun spot onto it. And now with those bubbles, you can see why I said earlier I could probably have made that inside shading a little bit darker, because I felt my bubbles didn't quite stand out enough. So you'll see there I'm actually darkening it up. I'm trying to score myself a bit more contrast by darkening the bubbles, which is not the right thing to do. I should actually have stopped at that point, darkened up the background, and then did my bubbles again. They came out okay in the end. I'm probably not 100% happy with them as what I would have liked to have been, but never mind. Those few bubbles didn't look quite enough, so I added 2 more. Okay. So with those bubbles done, that should be our first 3 shells sorted. Let's have a quick look and see what he looks like from viewing distance. Yeah, quite happy with that. So now what we're going to do is we'll move on to the stones. So the first thing we need to do is mix up some colors. So not wanting to lose my other colors, I grabbed a new palette. So I've put down some cadmium yellow. Rose is asking if the shells are in the PDF. Yes, they are. So I've got yellow ochre, French ultramarine, and titanium white. That's a little bit of cadmium yellow. So all I'm doing is I'm just adjusting, and I keep checking on the screen to see if I'm in the ballpark. It doesn't have to be exact, obviously. So I'll mix up 3 or 4 tones there. So what I'm looking at to get these colors, I'm looking at the different angles on the stone. Those different angles are obviously now going to be lighter and darker. So I've got 3 or 4 different angles that I see there. So to lighten it, a bit more white, a bit more cadmium yellow. And then the darker shadow actually seemed to have a little bit of an orangey tinge to it. So I decided to bring in a little bit of burnt sienna. Tony's saying it looks like a limited palette this evening. Yes, it actually is, and I'll tell you why. Everything is made up of the same thing. I mean, sea sand is all just crushed up shells and stones and stuff anyway, so you really do use a few colors. Let me see, if I look at my palette here, I'll tell you how many colors we used in the end of the day. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors. 6 colors. All sort of variations of brown. Yellow ochre, burnt sienna, burnt umber, then there was Payne's grey and orange, and obviously white. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is just put down the correct colors, the correct places. So I'm not going to try and paint a stone right from the start. Just get the correct colors down. The stone will form itself. So don't be afraid when you see something like this that's got all these different angles and things. It looks scarier than what it is. If you get those correct colors in the correct places, it'll automatically come out. Because then all you need to do after that is see how do those different colors tie into each other. Do they stop in a sharp line? Do they blend quickly into each other? Is the long slow shading? In other words, over there I've used a mixture of those, of the lightest and the color next to it. I'm showing this piece here in real time because what I want to do is I want you to see how I build up that stone. Small amounts of paint. Thank you. It's my lucky day. Dennis is not here, but my wife's got the day off, so I still scored a cup of coffee. Like with that little shadowy piece there, you see I'm reasonably trying to get the shape, but I'm not too concerned if it's not 100% the same. Remember, nobody's ever going to see my rock next to the rock I worked. When that thing's hanging up on the wall, as long as it looks like a stone, it's fine. Okay, now you can see how I'm just blending these guys into each other. It's quite a mottled stone. There's lots of different little facets, small little changes. What you'll usually find with the stones that you're going to find on the beaches, because they've been rolled around and tumbled by the sea for so many centuries, they seldom have hard edges. They tend to have nice smooth roundings. And as you can see, all the time I'm using my my full bit brush, my favorite little brush. Why I like it so much is because I can turn him one way and I can do nice broad shadings, and an instant later I just turn him 90 degrees and I can do chisel sharp lines. So as we curve around there, you see I'm gradually going lighter and lighter, because he's now gradually bending out towards to point more towards the sun. So I'll lighten him up as I go along. Believe it or not, that little shading I'm doing there around the outside is what's going to show me the stone is round, because the whole front top piece is flat. You know, you'd normally end up, if it was a roundish stone, you'd normally end up doing a shading on the main face of it. No, we can't. So that little shading there is actually more important than what you think it is. And now I'm just blending again, seeing how do the sides and the top face blend into each other. Do they blend quickly? Do they blend slowly? And then I'm working in them the same way. Then that bottom edge there is a nice little small little darker piece. So I worked him in as well. Again, that just gives me that extra plane. The more planes you can work in, or the more planes you can show, the more depth you've got, right? Karen, who normally paints with, says she's not painting today, she's just drawing and shading the shells. That's a wonderful idea, Karen. That's a wonderful idea. Just with a pencil. I think you could easily do that here in the class. It's a great exercise in noticing your tonal values. Because like with these shells we've done up to this point there's actually a very low tonal contrasts to them, is there? So, yeah, it's a great exercise that. Very clever of you to think of that. Okay, with the base in now, what I'm trying to do now is just work in those highlights, because those highlights give me that extra height that I want. And obviously you can't have bright lights without dark shadows, so that's why I'm darkening up my shadow. The minute I darken him, the bright colors look brighter, and voila, you've got more height. What I want you to do now is just notice, while I'm putting in this shadow, you'll immediately notice that those shadows we put in earlier, can you see they're not dark enough anymore? Even though they look great in the beginning. So, but it doesn't matter. Those initial little shadows you put in help you a hang of a lot, because they establish contrasts. So as you go along, obviously your contrasts could change. Okay, there you can see I'm just softening up that shadow. Remember, shadows always, they start off hard and sharp right up against the object, but the further away they move from an object, the softer they become. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I want this stone to look wet, because we just had that wave go over it. So I'm taking some French ultramarine and some titanium white, and I'm mixing them together, mixing up a little sky color. Because remember, if something's wet, it's going to reflect the sky color. Now I'm basically going to put a little color wash over this guy, and I'm going to keep it reasonably mottled as well, and that again just helps bring up those facets. And you'll see I'm even mottling a little bit into the shadow area, and then on those little high pieces I'll actually use eventually all the way right up to a neat white. You can add a little bit of titanium, cadmium yellow to your titanium white for those little sparkly bits at the top as well if you want to. That's fine. This time all I did was I used neat white. And you see how easy it was to make that stone look wet? That was it. Nothing to it. Alright, so we got one little stone to do. So this guy, yeah, we'll speed him up again, because we now know how to do a stone. So that's fine. Happy with that. So again, all I'm doing is I'm looking for the correct colors, putting them in the correct places, and then I'll take a look and see how do those guys mix into each other. It's like there on that little top center, you can almost say centerpiece. It's quite a sharp little line, so I won't blend them in too much, just enough to give a little bit of a rounding there. Karen says the shells she's got at the moment look more like bowls. Karen, that means you've got too much contrast in those seashells if they look too much like bowls. If you lower the amount of contrast, they'll flatten out again. Okay, there I'm just using, I actually ended up using a bit of neat titanium white, and then I added a little bit of cadmium yellow as well. here and there. Remember this stone, I don't want it to look wet. So I'm just working on the contrast and getting that little bit of a mottled effect there. So you see, I'm tapping it with my finger to make sure I don't get too hard lines. If you leave it on there, it's going to look like a sparkle. So by tapping it, it's softening the edges, and that sort of fuses those lighter marks into the stone. It makes it look like part of the stone. Alright, here comes the nice part. We've got this beautiful shell here, and it's quite an intricate one, ain't he? So we're going to have to know our business. So the big thing here is, let's get our colors sorted first. So again, burnt sienna, there's a bit of burnt umber. Now what I could see immediately was that the colors weren't very intense. They were slightly grey. So what I did was I actually mixed up a little bit of sky color to use that to grey them down. Instead of just adding white, I feel that just kept them alive. Remember, brown is actually orange's shadow color, so it's got a lot of blue in it. And again, you see how I've toned down that burnt sienna using the burnt umber. That takes away the brightness of it, because you're adding more blue to the mix. And by adding that sky color, mixes it up a bit more grey. And that's some cadmium yellow into the highlighty ones to add a bit of sun there. So 4 colors, and these colors are mixed up according to those little stripy bits on the shell itself. Now when you're painting this, what's really important is to follow these lines over here, because it twists like a spiral. We've got to get that spiral effect, and then you'll also see each spiral has got is sort of rounded. So we've got to get that rounding like that. Show each one. So you'll find it starts off round like this, and then in the center you'll straighten out, and then to the bottom you'll start curving in the opposite direction. So look very, very carefully at those directions. They're critical that you get them correct, because if you just make them straight, then you're not going to get that rounding. And if you make them bow all in the one direction, you can have a problem when you get to the other end, and suddenly you find that the bow sort of is the bow in the silhouette, or the outside edge of your shell doesn't correspond anymore with the lines that you've been drawing. So look very careful at those to get those bows right. They must gradually morph from the bow on the left hand side to the bow on the right hand side. I hope that made sense. Now to put that in, all I'm doing is I'm just using a tapping motion, because it's not solid lines. So like I said, it's pretty complex, because you've got the spiral, and then each spiral bows, and then part of that bow is it's ribbed. So it's not each one of those bows aren't smooth. They're ribbed as well. So that little stripy technique that I'm using there gives me a nice effect to get that feeling of the ribs. Alright, let's zoom in and you can see me doing this whole ribbed piece better. So I'm trying to put the correct colors in the correct places. I'm looking for the directions of the bow, and I'm also looking to see how long are those little stripes. So you see at towards the tip they're shorter, and then towards the back they gradually become longer. And then you'll also find that where the two sort of spirals meet, they tend to go a little darker over there as well, a bit more color in that area. I think what happens is as that poor shell gets tumbled around in the with the tides and stuff, it scrapes on the sea sand and stuff, and that's where you get that white edges, those little white lines. So at this point I'm working with the lightest color, putting them down where I see them. Then as I go along I'll gradually go darker and darker and darker. Now see from this little piece here, those little stripes gradually become more and more stripy. So I'm gradually bringing them closer together and a little bit more straighter lines, or more continuous lines would be rather, put it that way. Again, looking very careful at the direction of those lines. It's critical that you follow those directions. Careful observation. If you're scared that you lose those directions, what you can do is use a transparency or some baking paper and draw that shell out on the baking paper to exactly the same size. Then stick it on the canvas, so that you can lift him up and down. So as you go along and you're adding these little lines and stripes of yours, you can just double check it with your transparency. Again, you can see me adding it in real time. Very, very meticulous. I'm not necessarily trying to get them in exactly the same places, but I'm very meticulous to make sure that I'm getting the amount of stripes roughly the same. And I'm very meticulous to make sure that I'm getting their directions correct, to get those roundings, that bow in the spiral. As like I said earlier, you've got, where the two spirals meet, they tend to be sort of more solid, and then as it curls around, they'll tend to break up and become less and less and less. So there, in that little piece, you'll find there's more. And then as it goes towards the tip, those little lines tend to break up a little bit. Now, Lena is asking, do I pick up dark paint together with your light paint on your brush? Now, Lena, I'm presuming you're sort of asking, would I pick up, say, light paint on the one side and dark paint on the other side of the brush? If that's what you're asking, I seldom do it, and I didn't do it here. If you're asking me if I would sort of mix a light and a darker color together, yes, I would often do that. I'd often make little impromptu mixes on the palette by mixing two sort of colors next to each other together. Like in this case, I didn't wash my brush at any stage either. I just wiped off the worst on the kitchen towel, and off I went again. Gail saying, given the complexity of this shell, it might be worth it to have a transparency done at the copy shop. Yes, it would be. See there, I'm adding it, just starting to add a few little more solider lines in there, just to give me that small, little bit of a stripy effect. Again, I can't say this enough. Really important to get those lines in the correct direction. So even these little stripes that you're putting, that stripe must be in that direction of the spiral. Mary's asking if this is a flat brush. No, it's a fine liner. I think it's a number 00. Let's have a quick look. It is a number 2 fine round. Did that answer your question, Nolene? Okay, so here I'm just going darker and darker. Now you'll notice one thing that I haven't done up to this point is I'm not worrying about sort of contrasts. In other words, getting lighter colors on the sun side and darker colors on the shadow side to get that rounding. That comes later. When you're doing something as really complex like this, it's easier to just to get that rounding afterwards, and I'll show you shortly how easy it actually is to do that. A nice new little trick there for you today. This piece of the shell is actually by far the most difficult to get that little mottled, stripy effect. So it did take me quite a while to do it. But I wasn't in a hurry, because remember, this is your focal point in the painting. So I know the focal point always takes the longest. It has to take the longest because you need to get the most detail in it. So I was quite happy to take my time and make sure I get it looking good. I wanted to be happy with it. Can you see how I'm gradually getting more stripy now? But yet I'm still trying to stick to the stripes going sort of along the length and around its circumference. So you've got sort of two sets of stripes to think of here. So in other words, those stripes going around the spiral form lines going down the length of the shell as well. So what I tend to do is I'd put in the spiral lines first, and then I'll come back, and there where the lines are going down the length of the shell, I'll actually go and I'll broaden that piece of line over there. Tony's got a wonderful question. Can you use acrylic paste as a kind of molding to create a raised shape that you can paint over with oil once dry? You bet. I often do that. You'd put down all your texture paste. I will still have a class on using the texture paste, but you'd put it down and you'd actually mold it. I'm actually quite looking forward to that class. It's going to be a wonderful class. Yeah, now the texture paste you can mold and to have exactly the same texture as a shell. We often used to do elephants and fish and all sorts of stuff in the class. In my studio in South Africa. can you see how I'm sort of thickening the lines? So sometimes it gets to a point where as I've thickened the line, they actually meet. And that's fine, that's fine. All it's doing is it's giving me that stripy effect in both directions. Alrighty, I think there that's sort of, oh, we were sort of over the hill. You find the broadest part was when you get to the broadest part, from there on it becomes really stripy, more distinct lines. So this section that we did here now was the hardest. And that's why I did it in real time to show you exactly what I'm doing there. Now can you see those little bulges in the spiral? And that's all because of the lines. If I didn't get those lines right, it would have been flat. From this point on, you'll also, what I've gradually started doing was I gradually started thinning down my paints, little bit by little bit by little bit. Because to be able to paint a more solid line, you need your paint to be thinner. And that's obviously what I'm busy doing there now at the moment, out of view. I hope, yeah. Just thought for a moment maybe I'd gone out for a smoke break or something. Alright, so I've thinned down the paint, and now you see that allows me to be able to do more solid lines. But you see I'm still not doing it in a solid continuous line. I'm still doing it in a bit of a mottled, I'm pressing harder and softer, harder and softer. So as I get to that, the line going down the length of the shell, I press a little harder, and then I lift it up the brush, and then I press harder and softer, harder and softer. So that's still going to give me my nice little ribbed liney effect. And as I go down along now as well, what I'll do is I will gradually bring these lines closer and closer together. So at this point they are quite far apart. As we go down towards the other end, those lines gradually start getting closer and closer together, up to a point where you'll actually find that they sort of start moving along 2 by 2. What's also important is that as you finish that little curve over there, you get it right up to the end of the right up to the edge of the shell. I find you'll see I was doing it myself there. You naturally tend to stop just before the edge because you don't want to go over the edge. So I had to keep correcting myself and coming back and fixing up those, making sure I get right up against the edge. See there, I'm starting to add 2 by 2. So less and less and less white space. Starting to see the effect quite nicely already, eh? Again, it's all about getting those directions right. It would be extremely difficult if you hadn't at the drawing stage added those few little lines in for a guide for yourself. You would have made life very difficult for yourself. So that's why I added in those few little guidelines when I was doing the initial drawing. Now, I want you to notice right on the edges, you see how it quickly curls on the edge, and that quick little curl piece helps your eye helps to show your eye that it's going around. It's not sort of flat and stopping. That quick little final curl, and it physically is like that on the shell. You'll see on the photograph. But that quick final little curl, if you ever need to show that something goes around, that's the secret. Yay, nearly done. That was quite a long stretch to do a complicated shell like that, isn't it? But believe me, it's a lot of work, but it's really worth it in the end. Shell paintings like this are super sellers. I'll tell you, you can hang up a shell painting in a gallery in a center of in a center of a desert, or anywhere where there isn't a shell or a sea in sight, and I tell you that painting will sell quickly. People love shells. I don't know, there's something about them they've got this magical feel about them. Alright, so what I'm doing now is now I've got my basic texture that I want. Now we need to add molding to it, because at the moment, even though we've got all these lines and everything all right, he's still as flat as a pancake. So we're going to have to give him some texture or some molding. So I'm drying all that off, and we're going to use glazers to give him his texture. Or his molding, I should say. Right, so there you can see me I'm following those lines and just thickening some of them up again, just to make sure I get those ribs going, or those lines going all the way along the length. Batman says he needs to take lots of seashell photos on his tour to the Gold Coast. Yeah. Did you think there'll still be lots of shells on the Gold Coast? Usually touristy places like that, you find that they're all gone. It's actually quite sad. You actually seldom find nice big shells like this on the beach anymore. We were lucky the other day when we went away for a weekend. My daughter found a huge shell on the beach. We almost fell on our back when we saw it. Needless to say, we grabbed it. So, just like the tourists do. All right, let's dry them off again, and let's get down to getting that molding right. Yeah, Batman says maybe that's why the seashell paintings sell so well, because you hardly find them on the beach anymore. You actually have to go to the... Oh, gee, where's Nolan? Okay, there I was just adding a little bit more of that yellowy color in between, just here and there. I felt it was a little bit too white. And I did see a little bit of that color in the shells, here and there, so I was just adding that in. We'll get to the molding eventually, gee whiz. Yeah, nowadays if you want to buy a big shell, you got to go to a gift shop, eh? Suppose if we didn't like the shell so much, then there would be tons on the beach and none in the gift shops. Bit of a double-edged sword, eh? I must say, here in New Zealand, you will still get to beaches and there's tons and tons and tons of shells. Something you don't get in South Africa. They're obviously small shells, but piles of them. You get to beach, the whole beach is just millions of shells. Beautiful. Alrighty, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of Payne's Grey, because remember it's got that bluish tinge to it, so I'm happy with that, because when we shadow this guy, what's going to happen, you're not going to see it so much in the darks, but you're going to see it on that white that's shining through. So that's why I've used the Payne's Grey and the white. So I've mixed up a grey and I've kept it on the blue side, and then I've just brought in a touch of some of the shell color into it, just so that it's not stark blue. Remember, white does reflect all the colors around it, so that's why I brought in just a little bit of that shell color. Alright, so there you can see what I've done is I've converted it to grayscale, just to give you a feel for where do the shadings go. So they're in that indentation and on the opposite side from the light. So I've got two colors there. Again, just Payne's Grey and white. So I'll use the lighter one on the sun side. Remember, our sun's coming from obviously now from the top and from right to left. But now to complete the rounding, I do add a small little bit of a shading over there. So I'll start on the edge and I'll quickly fade it in towards the inside of the shell. Very quick shading. Now I'm using the darker one on the shadow side. And look at that. I've hardly even started. Look at all that molding. Zip zap and it's there. Awesome, eh? So all I'm going to do is just keep building up that contrast a little bit more. And you see I'm working it into that, into the spiral. On the opposite side of the light. So you always got to remember where your light comes from. The whole time, whatever you're painting, you got to know where that light's coming from. The further away an item points away from the light, the darker it's going to become. The more it points towards the light, the brighter it's going to be. So as I put the shading in, sort of just to the right top right of the center. I'm never going to touch that area. I want that to stay absolutely neat, because that gives me that brightest area and that gives me a nice sunny look. Well, that couldn't have been easier, eh? From flat as a pancake to nice and round in an instant. There I'm actually bringing in just a touch of neat white here and there, just for an extra little sparkle in the highlight area. Just to really bring out that contrast. Look at that, lovely. Pretty happy with that. Okay, so now we know the shadows aren't quite dark enough yet. So I've taken that initial shadow color and I'm going to add some more Payne's Grey to it. I'd actually, because this was acrylics and I'd painted it with a day before, mine had dried on me, so I just quickly remixed it. So it was the titanium white, cadmium, yellow ochre, titanium white, yellow ochre, and Payne's Grey. So I'll start right up against that shell, because that's where it's at his darkest. And we'll blend him away from the sunlight. Remember to get that final little edge. You want to get that final edge there. It mustn't be hard. There you can see me starting to extend that shadow, just to increase the height of that little shell that's standing up. The closer to the ground I start him, and the longer I extend him, the more upright he's standing. The flatter he is, the more that shadow would start closer to the tip. Hope that made sense. So again there I'm just extending that shadow there, just to, because I extend the shadow, I increase the height. The longer the shadow, the more higher it is. Darlene says it looks so realistic. She keeps feeling that I must be careful of getting sand in my brush now. Yeah, that'd be funny, eh? And you also see now how quick it is to come back and adjust those shadows, because you've already got the basics in. It's 2 ticks to quickly just darken them up, give them a quick little color wash over. Now in those little corners there where those two meet, they'll always be at their darkest. So I'll make sure I get that at its darkest and fade him out. Again, remember the length of your shadow is also going to depend on where's the sun coming from. How high up is the sun in the air, in the sky? If it's midday, you're going to have shorter shadows. If it's late in the day, you can have longer shadows, or early in the day, you also can have longer shadows. Alright, hard work done. Let's go and add that water, that wave gushing over those shells. And that'll really add to that mystery and inviting feeling. So our main thing is we want to get you can't really see the water, so we're going to do it with the foam. Penny, just to confirm, I painted this one with acrylics, just to speed up the drying time, because it was a multi-step process. Because now obviously before you start this piece, again your painting has to be dry. Okay, so they are just remixing up some of that initial water shadow color. Because now what we want to do, or that initial shadow color like we used for the shells and stuff, because what we want to do now is create that shadow because the water that's gushing along has got height, it's going to cast a shadow on the sand. So I'll draw the silhouette of it. You see how squiggly I'm doing it? Nice little squiggles, no sharp edges. Remember, it's foam, so those bubbles stick to each other. So I'll get a nice little squiggly, interesting line, keep it interesting, and I'll fade him away. So he fades away the sharp edge. You see, just by doing that, you can immediately sort of feel the height there. It's almost like there's maybe 2 layers of rock there at the moment, eh? The one is just closer to you than the other one. Alright, so for the bubbles, what I do is I first put down a shadow bubble color. Because if you just use white, it becomes awfully boring. So I'm using a little bit of cerulean there for sky color. I could have used ultramarine as well. I think why I used the cerulean, it was closer. It was the first blue that popped up, and it was sky color, so that was fine. So just a little bit of sky color in there, and that's going to give me a shadow color. Remember, the bubbles are white, so they'll reflect the colors around them. So what I've done is I've made them reflect the sky color. Alright, so to get that, I'm going to use a little bit of a circular dabbing motion, and you'll see again I'm just keep turning the brush in my fingers. So what I want to do is I want to get a rough edge, to sort of a rough rounding kind of edge. I don't know how you'd put it. And I'd make that edge thicker and thinner, so you got that leading edge of foam there, thicker and thinner, and that just keeps it interesting. And what I did was, I also felt it was a little bit too see-through, so I did dry it and give it another layer. Okay, now I'm painting the actual foam. So again, you see what I'm trying to do there is get a nice flowing effect, because those bubbles stick to each other. So I've got, you can almost think of strands, think of flowing strands. So I'm trying to create a bit of a flowing effect, and again I keep turning that brush and using different angles and stuff. So I am obviously using the the photo as a reference, but I'm not trying to get it perfect. So yeah, I'm going to do the whole canvas now. Now notice on that leading edge how I go thicker and thinner. And again with these little strands of foam, I'm going to bigger areas, smaller areas. And now guys, you have to be brave. Don't be scared to go. You have to go over your shells. If you don't, remember, this foam sort of sinks those shells down underneath the water. So you've got to have foam going over your shells. So I know you've spent a lot of time and a lot of hard work doing those shells, but you just got to be brave. So if you are scared, then what you do is just practice getting this little flowy shapes, those little random abstract shapes of the foam. Just practice it maybe first on a spare canvas or even a spare piece of paper. So what I'm first doing there is just working up those main big bulk of foam. We'll come back later and add the real tiny ones. So I'll add the big ones and then I'll go gradually smaller and smaller, add a few little connecting ones. As you can see there on the photograph, you see how they sort of, they pull and drag and flow out of each other. And then you get these few little breakaway guys. So we're not worrying too much about the breakaway ones for now, just the main ones. Alright, so now you can use either titanium white or you can add a little bit of sun color to it as well. So maybe say a little bit of cadmium yellow. Now I'm going to go right over the previous ones that I've done, doing exactly the same thing. And now what will happen, because you're using sort of that odd mottled movement, automatically you're not covering that previous shadow color completely. You're mostly covering it, but not completely. So you'll still have a little bit of those shadows shining through, that shadow color, and that gives you depth. Where it is important that you don't cover all that shadow color though, is on this leading foam edge over here. There you want to get that rounding. So on the top of the water, in other words, in this case you can sort of say the top of the canvas, where the foam starts, on the top end of the canvas is the flat part on the water. So there you're going to get lots of sun. But now as it curls around to touch the actual sand, is pointing away from the sun. So you've got to create that little bit of a mottled shading over there. So start off with lots of foam on that leading edge, and then as you come towards the shadow that we put in, less and less. Make sure there's less and less paint on the brush. Not quite so easy to see it on here, but afterwards what I'll do is I'll zoom in on the final painting, then I'll show you that again. This part actually goes quite quick. Now the big secret is don't try and paint each bubble, guys. It's not possible and it's not necessary. When you view this, you're painting at viewing distance, those little bubbles, you're not going to see them anyway. Alright, so what I'm doing here is I'm again using a bit of my clear cover. What I want to do now is I want to mask off that shadow and I want to mask off the beach. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little bit of a bubble illusion. So I obviously don't want bubbles in my shadows and on my beach. So I'm just masking that off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the sand color over here. And I'm going to, and I'm going to mask off my shells as well. So I'll put the paint over the shells, or the mask over the shells, and I'll carefully cut out where the bubbles are. And now I'm just going to splatter over all that foam. So in other words, at the end of the day, all that's exposed is the sand and the foam. So you've covered up your shells that are underneath the water, and you've covered up the dry sand and that little foam shadow. And you see what's happened? That's giving you that illusion of those little bubbles. Because inside the bubble, what's going to happen? It's going to shine through. Whatever's below it's going to shine through. And now I'm using my shadow color that I used for that leading edge of the foam, which was titanium white, yellow ochre, and a little bit of Payne's grey. And I'm giving each one of those little foam guys a shadow. Now my sun is coming from the right to the left, so to the bottom left of each one of those guys I'm adding a shadow. Now the higher you want that water, the further away you put that shadow. I didn't want too much height here, so I've left a tiny space, maybe 4 millimeters, 5 millimeters space between the actual piece of foam and the shadow itself, and that just gives me a little bit of height. So again, just put it in and soften it. And the minute you put that shadow in, you've got nice, lovely height there. And again, that shadow just sinks all those seashells and stuff back down below it. So we're nearly done. So it was a lot of work, but I don't think it was hard work. The only thing that was really difficult here was the main focal point, our shell over there. We had to be a little bit careful with him, eh? Okay, so let me zoom in there and you'll see that shadow. See, I've left a little bit of a gap, not much. Alright, so what I'm doing now is I've taken just basically white, and I'm just dragging the brush over the area really randomly. What that's going to do is it's going to give me sort of a bit of a mottled effect to give you a bit of a feel for the movement of the water. As your water flows, you get lighter and darker patches. Very rough. I'm using that flat end of a rigger brush. I'm going to use a shadow color shortly, and I did slow it down, I think, if I remember right, and you can see the actual motion. So I'm using a bit of shadow color, lots and lots and lots of water in it, not too much paint in the brush. You can actually wipe it off on your kitchen roll first. This is very subtle, absolutely subtle. What you're really trying to do is just create a little bit of almost like a mottled haze over the blank areas. What you could also do is sort of give a bit of a sky color wash over the whole area, but I felt that was just too much. So can you see there? It's just a very, very light mottled effect, just by dragging the brush over the area, and sort of just really rough. If you find those little mottled pieces are too hard, just rub it with your finger to soften them. It's just a haze. Alright, so here I'm using just the white, and I'm adding those little few flyaway guys. Again, not too big. Why we add them at the end is because these guys don't do shadows. They're too small, so they won't cast their own shadow. So what I'll do is with these, I'll actually make some of them go over those bigger ones as shadows. And again, that just really adds that extra depth and movement to the water. And keep them random. Don't get patterns now. Don't make all these little dabs and dashes the same. Some a little bit bigger, some squiggly, some straight, some round. And you'll find these flyaway bits will be reasonably close to the bigger ones. And they sort of become less and less the further away you go. And by the time you're done, you'll almost have a bit of a these little guys, you can almost think as though they're making little stepping stones between the bigger ones. Alright, so with that, I was happy with the painting, so I decided to sign it. Okay, so there's the final painting. I've put it in a frame. What I want to do is I want to show you that the height of the foam. So let's zoom in over there. So what I did here was I've got that the foam itself, then I left a gap, and then I put in the shadow. So the longer you make that gap over there, the higher your water is. Okay. So that's sort of how you control that height. Then I want to show you what I did here with some of these bubbles. Remember we put the splatter over it? So you've got small splatter, like, just grab a brush here. So the smaller splatter, just find where I am here on the screen. Smaller splatter like this and like that, I don't worry about it. But when I've got, and like that, when I've got a big dot, what I'll do is I'll actually take my my titanium white, and I'll circle that little dot. What that does is it makes that bubble sort of stand up. And that's really what it does. Alright, let's take a look at the shell itself. So there you can see look how nicely that shell sort of just disappears under the water now. It's awesome, eh? And it was so easy. All we needed to do is bring something over it. Okay, and then lastly, I said I'll show you this little leading edge. So let's zoom in to say around there, because we want that foam there sort of rounds. Let's go back to our photograph, just to remind you. Let's go back to there. You see how this foam sort of rounds over there? So you've got, because this is further away from the light, it goes darker and darker. And this is closer to the light, and that goes lighter and lighter. So let's go back to the painting itself. So you see over here, I've got lots more foam, or lots more of the white on top. And as I've gone around, I've added less and less of those white, so that on this edge over here, it's that initial neat sky color that's shining through. Okay. And let's see what else can I show you, just for interest's sake. Again, you see over there by those guys, I've added those little circles around the bubbles. Zoom in over there. Yeah, there's nothing funny over there. Like I say, in an ideal world, I would have made this just slightly darker, but it's fine. It just means I've got a flatter shell than what it really is. If I do sort of compare with the photo, the tonal values are correct, but sometimes you do have to just use your artist license and darken things up. Can you see there? My tonal value is fine, but sometimes you've got to use that artist license to get that extra depth and stuff that you're looking for. What I do like is you see how nice that stone just reflects because of the little bit of sky color on it. That was easy peasy. Alright, I'm not seeing any brand new questions. I'm seeing a bunch of thank yous and and jelly beans. Okay, Nina's saying, explain the shadow on the foam again. Sure. Let's go to the photograph. Let's zoom way out. Actually, I think what we can actually do is, let me go and grab the original photograph that I grabbed my foam from, that I modified. Is that guy over there, so that we can see a real world situation and not my put together one. Because our sun is coming from the back, what happens is it then casts a shadow on that height of the water, casts a shadow on the ground, because the light now obviously can't get through the foam. So just keep it nice and tight, dark tight against the foam, and then fade it out as normal. Did that answer your question, Nina? You're saying, why is there a space? Ah, okay, all right. In other words, this space over here between the foam itself and the shadow. Okay, now I'm with you, Nina. Because of height. Let me see if I can demonstrate that. Let's see, how am I going to do that? Let me grab a piece of paper. Just bear with me. Let me see if I can grab a piece of paper or a canvas or something. All right, here's a white goodie. So I'll put that down over there. Let's zoom in on it and see if we can get ourselves a shadow. We'll lift up the camera a bit. And what can we take? Let's take the color buster. All right. Let's see if you can see this. Against, when an object is against something else, the shadow is right against each other, right? Now as you start lifting it up, can you see the shadow there? Now as I lift it up more and more and more, you get a gap. And eventually, you see what happens when you've got lots of space? It actually appears like there's, I'm trying to do this. It looks like there's a gap between the object and its shadow. As you come down, you see the shadow comes closer and closer and closer to the ground. As I lift it up, because there's now more air between those two. So that makes it look like there's a gap between those two. So the more height I want, the more gap I give. The less height I want, the less gap I give between those guys. Does that make sense? Alrighty. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Lots and lots and lots of work to do with the painting, but it's not that difficult. Just a little bit of concentrating to do with the main focal point, the shell. But other than that, it's actually quite a simple painting. But it looks beautiful at the end, so you're going to have a great time painting yours. Next time we are painting rain. Wow, yeah, that's going to be awesome. So I'm going to show you how to show the rain falling from a cloud and how to get that rainy effect on the ground and stuff like that. I'm quite looking forward to that one. It's going to be great fun. All right, you have a wonderful week. I'll see you on the forum.
Hey, Basket TV!